Gary started the recording. Excellent. Good evening, everyone. So I know I've been putting a significant number of Mara Makomis on source sheets on the website, on the web, on the WhatsApp group. But I'm feeling a little bit of pressure given that the last Shiur will be on. We've only got 2 sessions left, really, Sunday and Tuesday. So the topic I wanted to talk about today is in many respects a crowbar or a tool to crack open a couple more elements of the sugya, and also we'll do chazara for us of some of the topics that we visited already. So don't panic; it's not a completely new subject. So Tosfos on our sugya on Ein Daled Amud Beis references the Gemara in Avodah Zarah Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, in which the Gemara talks about a similar matter. So the topic of the Gemara there is the issue of bishul akum, which is something cooked by a non-Jew. And the story was that a Jew buried karos, they buried a gourd or some sort of vegetable in the oven, in the wood or the ashes on the floor of the oven. And then the akum came along and threw a piece of wood into the oven. So it's the same as our sugya. Shoda sichsa, they threw a piece of wood into the oven. And the discussion point in the Gemara is whether this piece of wood whether this is now considered bishul akum or not. The context of the Gemara is discussing what happens when the akum doesn't have intention to burn something, to cook something, whether that creates bishul akum. So the Gemara talks about a case, for example, of a very remarkable case earlier in the sugya, I don't know if anyone looked it up, of an akum, a nochri, who lit a fire in a meadow, and the locusts in the meadow got singed. Now some locusts anyway, are kosher, and these locusts became delicious roast locusts through the singeing process. And the Gemara discusses whether the locusts are bishul akum or not. And the Svarah to say they are bishul akum is because, after all, they were roast through this fire in the meadow, which was lit by this pagan, by this nochri. On the other hand, the nochri had no intention to roast locusts. The nochri was just going about his own business of vandalizing fields. So that's the context of the Gemara. Whether something which is done with no intention of cooking is bishul. The Gemara then gives another example, which is a memra of Rabbi Yochanan, about a nochri who singed the ear of an animal, and the purpose of singeing it was to remove the hair. It's not very nice to cook some meat when it has hair there, but in the same time it also cooked or roasted that little bit of meat. And again, the same discussion in the Gemara about whether that's called bishul akum or not. Then the Gemara gets to our sugya, and it talks about someone who threw this peg into the oven, and there was a gourd inside the oven, and therefore it got cooked through the throwing of the peg into the oven. And the Gemara says the same thing, that this is mutter, the gourd, the kara is mutter, because it's because the nochri, well, the Gemara, it just says a memory that it's mutter. Says the Gemara, this is pashut. Of course it's mutter, because he didn't have intention to cook the peg. And the Gemara says, no, there's a chiddush. You would have thought that his intention was to cook the peg. His intention is to harden the peg. So in some respects, this is a twin Gemara to ours, but in the most important respect, it's actually a contradiction to our Gemara. And this is the question that Tosfos asked there in Avodah Zarah, which I put in the source sheet, that the Gemara ends up being a stira between that Gemara and our Gemara, because that Gemara says that putting the peg is done l'shuri mana kamachavin. His intention is l'shuri mana, and that's the reason why it's not bishul akum, because his intention is to harden the peg as opposed to softening the peg. And our Gemara says no, the exact opposite. The reason why you're chayv on Shabbos is because you're chayv b'shum Mevashel. What would you have said, the havamina, that your intention is l'shuri mana? The hot comet, that it becomes softened in the process of hardening this peg in the kiln, and therefore one is chayev because it is bishul, it goes through a bishul stage. So how do we deal with this steer in the sugyas? So that's the topic I wanted to look at, and I want to use it, as I said, as a way to think a little bit more carefully about some of the topics, about what bishul means in this context and what intentionality means and what the melachot is. So that's the question on the sugya. Now, if you went through the Maramakomas, you would have seen that there's 3 or 4, actually 4, I think I printed all 4 mahalchim, 4 methods of answering this question, or 4 sources anyway. The first Maramakom to answering this question, the first suggestion is Tosfos, and Tosfos answers something that's a little unclear. Tosfos says, and the Indian Shabbos, Afal Gav. Well, sorry, maybe I should really start in order. I should start with Rashi, but I'll push Rashi to the side just because his answer is a little harder to understand. So it says, so even though in Perek Klal Gadol, in Masechet Shabbat, we see the opposite. That one's chayev because of Mevashel. Hainil Indian Shabbos, that's with respect to Shabbos. The Afal Gav to l'shurei mana k'machavein, even though his intention is to harden it, it also gets slightly cooked, as we discussed in the last year, as it gets softened. The gamla isa bishul geruim is chavin, and he does have intention for that low quality bishul. The gabi Shabbos hichmiru lachshivoi, and with respect to Shabbos, they were machmir to be machshivit, to give it chashivut, to give it worth, to consider it as something, even though it's only a bishul gerua, a negligible and insignificant and low-quality bishul. But with respect to pagan cooking, lo chashiv ve'eino chayev ad she'is chavin a bishul gamo. And with respect to pagan cooking, one's not, it's not chashiv, it's not significant, and therefore you're not chayev till they had intention for complete bishul. Now, I think I know approximately what Tosfos means, but I definitely don't know exactly what Tosfos means. In a moment, we'll look at another issue, and I think it will give the broad intention of Tosfos. However, there are massive textual difficulties in the Tosfos. The first textual difficulty is Tosfos is coming to say a chiluk between the halachos of Shabbos and the halachos of Bishul Akum. And I hope in a few moments we'll understand more or less what his distinction is. However, just as a bit of background, Hilchos Shabbos, at least this bishul over here that we're talking about, is a melacha d'oraisa. How do I know we're talking here about bishul d'oraisa? Because the Gemara said chayev. So the cooking of this peg is a d'oraisa Torah prohibition. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is that bishul akum is an issa d'rabbanon. Pagan cooking is only a rabbinical issa. And Tosfos literally switches the two in his language. When it comes to bishul akum, he talks about chayev. Ve'ein chayev ad she'is covered in bishul gamo. You only chayev when the pagan, the non-Jew, the akum, has intention for a proper bishul. There's no chiyuvim over here. It's osa. It should say ve'ein osa ad she'is covered in bishul gamo. And this has already been pointed out by some of the Mevashel, who say we have to change the gears of the Tosfos to amend the text. Okay, but Tosfos also talks about Shabbos, and he says, "Ava the gabi Shabbos tichmiru lachshivoi." With respect to Shabbos, they were machmir to be machshiv it, to consider it more chashuv, to give it a chashivas. Hichmiru, they were machmir, they were stringent. I mean, who are the they over here? This is an Issa Torah. I mean, it's not them who are machmir. You could say Chazal understood to be machmir, or that's how they interpreted halacha. But hichmiru is incomprehensible to me. So that's the first point I want to say. In Tosfos, I have absolutely no answer to these questions, by the way, unless we change the girsa. I don't really understand what Tosfos is saying or what his language is. However, I think that the core distinction that Tosfos is saying is one that we perhaps can understand, even though maybe there's something we're completely missing over here, given the confusion in the language of Tosfos. So this is the introduction to Tosfos. What does Tosfos mean? What's his general chiluk? So I think that by looking at other Rishonim, we can understand a little bit. We can understand a little bit better what Tosfos is saying. And to do that, maybe we'll jump out of order of the Rishonim and look at the Ritva. I printed the Ritva. In fact, I printed both Ritvas: the Ritva in Masechet Shabbos and the Ritva in Masechet Chunin, in Masechet Avodah Zarah. maybe if we learn the Ritva of Avodah Zarah, it's a little easier. And the Ritva basically says in Masechet Avodah Zarah that with respect to Bishul Akum, Hikilu, they were lenient. Now I understand the language of the Ritva, they were lenient. I know who they are. This is the Drabanon, because Bishul Akum is an Issa Drabanon. And they were lenient and said, Lo Yozlinon Elabasa Ikah HaKavana. You only go after the Ikah HaKavana, the main intention. Masha'inkin in Shabbos, whereas with respect to Shabbos, the Meleches Machsheves also Torah, the Torah forbade Meleches Machsheves, Mishum Hochi Chayev, Gamkein ala Ripoi, Afal Gav de Ein Zeh Ikah Kavanosoi. Nonetheless, you're Chayev on the Ripoi, even though this isn't your main intentionality. So the broad point of the Ritva, though, in a moment we'll look with more care at his language, is that the Ritva says that because of something called Meleches Machsheves, even a subsidiary or minor melacha intention, is enough to make you chayiv. Whereas with Bishul Akum, which is a Issa Drabanon, Hikilu, they were lenient and they didn't create the Issa. So this sounds like Tosfos's answer, except that of course it's the language is the other way around. Tosfos says that with Shabbos they were machmir. The Ritva, seemingly more correctly, says that with Bishul Akum they were makel, they were lenient. The point isn't a chumrah of Shabbos Drabanon, the point is a leniency of Bishul Akum Drabanon. But leaving that aside, both the Ritva and Tosfos really in a sense say the same thing. They say that Shabbos is stricter, Bishul Akum is more lenient. Why? With respect, in what way? With respect to a subsidiary intention, a minor intent, kavana, with respect to Bishul Akum it doesn't matter, and with respect to Hilchos Shabbos, it does matter. Now, what is this svara of Meleches Machsheves? So here I remind you of something we've discussed previously and we've met many times before. We learn Meleches Machsheves is a word that's endemic throughout Masechet Shabbat. It's used again and again and again by the Rishonim and by the Gemara itself. And it is not it's a language using the language of the Torah, rather than being a specific halachic concept. We know that we learn the melachos of Mishkan of Shabbos from Meleches HaMishkan, for the melachos of the Mishkan, and the melachos of the Mishkan are described as Meleches Machsheves. They are works of intentionality. It's in the context of their craftsman's works. They're targeted and thought through and intended melachos. And from that we learn that with respect to the melachos of Shabbos, machshava in intention is important. Now, what halachos do we learn from Meleches Machsheves about intentionality? A whole array of halachos, and this is it's really important when everyone meets Meleches Machsheves not to create an assumption that all uses of Meleches Machsheves are identical. There are many halachos that are learned out from Meleches Machsheves. Perhaps most famously, melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa. That's one that we looked at previously in these shiurim, and therefore I'll use that as our example. Melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa, which in fact we'll come to again a little bit later in today's shiur, perhaps Sunday's shiur. Melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa is a melacha where the intention of the melacha was not for the primary purpose of the melacha itself. So a very extreme example would be where you're not doing the melacha in order to achieve anything positive, but to remove a problem. So, for example, if you take rubbish out of the room and put it in the street, not because you want it in the street, but because you don't want it in your house, this is lacking Meleches Machsheves. My intention is not to achieve something positive because I want it outside. My intention is to remove it. I don't want it here, and therefore it's not a targeted, intended melacha. Or if I trap an insect or in a cup on Shabbos, this is potentially melacha of Seder. It's not Meleches Machsheves. If I trap an animal because I want the animal, I want to farm the animal, I want the skin of the animal, that's the intention of Seder. If I'm trapping it because I don't want it, I'm removing it, I'm trying to restrict it, that's not Meleches Machsheves. I don't want the animal, on the contrary, I'd be quite happy if it disappeared completely. I don't want it, and therefore that's not the melacha of Seder. So this is an example of the concept of Meleches Machsheves, and these are unique to Hilchos Shabbos. If someone turns up in Beis Din with a defense for an act of murder and says, I didn't want the person dead, I just didn't want them in the room with me, and this was the most convenient way of getting them out, this wouldn't be relevant. This wouldn't be a relevant criteria in Hilchos Ritzicha, because Hilchos Ritzicha is the act, the Maisa, whereas Meleches Shabbos is a melacha. It's a engagement with a positive act, and part of the engagement is intentionality. That's what you see in the concept of Meleches Machsheves. The Ritva here invents an application of this concept of melachos mashavos. To the best of my knowledge, it doesn't have a source in Gemara, this application of it. This is the Ritva applying the broad brushstroke terminology of melachos mashavos to a new halachic concept, which is, since you see that machshava is important with Shabbos, very often the drasha is used as a restriction, not always, but often used as a restriction, meaning you have to have the positive intentionality, and removal of intentionality means you're potter for Shabbos. But the Ritva here uses it for the stringent way. He says, therefore, since intentionality defines the melacha, so normally we would look at ourselves and we'd say, is this an act of bishul? No, because my primary intention is to harden the peg, not to soften the peg. Nonetheless, says the Ritva, since I have a subsidiary intentionality to also do a bishul, that's enough to make it melachas bishul. So the melachos mashavos defines what am I engaged in, what melacha am I doing at this point in time. I may have thought the melacha is a melacha of hardening a peg, which is exempt, as you see in the Gemara, kamashmaran chayev, because in terms of melacha, the achievement and this askus and the involvement and the engagement with melachas Shabbos, intentionality defines it. And since I also have an intentionality of bishul, even though it's only a subsidiary intentionality, that is enough to make me chayev. But bishul akum, no such halacha when it comes to bishul akum. So this is the svara of Tosfos, and it seems to me that this is also what, this is the svara of the Ritva, and it seems to me this is also what Tosfos means, even though, as I said, there's a language problem in the language of Tosfos. So this is the first answer to the question, as far as I can see in the sugya. A second attempt at resolving this is one found in the Ramban, and I think I printed the Ramban also at the bottom of page 1. And the Ramban says, V'yesh lomar, one can answer this question by saying, the afal gav the ihu mechavin eshurei mana, even though his intention is to dry it out, given the efsha enim kain rofi mekara, since it's impossible to dry it out unless it softens it first, chayev on chayev. The moed Rabbi Shimon b'sik reisha v'lo yomus, because Rabbi Shimon agrees with b'sik reisha v'lo yomus. So the background to this Ramban is as follows. Normally, there is a halacha of davar she'einu miskavin. Now, davar she'einu miskavin is an unintended side consequence of what I'm doing. And this is not a particular halacha in Shabbos. This is a halacha in many areas, that davar she'einu miskavin is not chayev. So an example of this would be, it was machlokas more correctly, machlokas tanoim. We saw this previously, machlokas Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. And an example of this would be wearing shartness clothes, for example, where I have no intention of wearing the clothing for the sake of wearing. Wearing is, what do we mean by wearing clothes? Clothes are worn for protection, clothes are worn for adornment. What happens if I'm wearing clothes simply as a way to transport them from A to B? The Gemara gives the example of a smuggler who wears many layers of clothes. They put on many layers of new clothing to get them across the border, and then they can remove the clothing to get them across the border. The Gemara speaks about a model who wears clothes to show them off in order to sell them. In these cases, the Gemara calls this a davar she'einu miskavin. It's an unintended side consequence. We meet this most classically in Hilchos Shabbos with the example of someone who's schlepping a piece of furniture through their garden and creating a furrow. That's the classic example the Gemara gives of davar she'einu miskavin, and it's machlokas whether one's chayev for davar she'einu miskavin or not. Now, or whether it's also, with davar she'einu miskavin. Now, the principle is that an unintended side consequence, which is a psik reisha, is an inevitable unintended side consequence. There, everyone would agree that it's chayiv. It doesn't help. This is the concept of psik reisha. Psik reisha is chopping off a head v'lo yomus, and saying, it didn't occur to me that it would die. Is it possible to chop off a head and say it wouldn't die? So the Gemara's example is if kids used to enjoy playing football with a chicken's head. If someone would say, I didn't intend to kill the chicken, I merely intended to get hold of the head, and the chicken head falling off is a side consequence. The death of the chicken is a side consequence. It's a davar she'einu miskavin. We don't say that psik reisha and yomus. This is too integrally bound up and connected with the result to argue that it's separate. the very act of making a football out of a chicken head is an act of murder, an act of killing the chicken, and therefore I can't argue that this is a side consequence. So the Ramban here is saying that the softening of the words of the peg is a dover she'einu miskavin. Nonetheless, it's a psik reisha, and therefore everyone would agree that you are chayiv for it. Masha'inkin with bishul akum, there we're happy to follow intentionality. The logic of following intentionality with bishul akum is that bishul akum is a gezerah in order to create a distance between the pagan akum and the member of Klal Yisrael, and therefore it depends on whether the pagan was planning, the akum was planning to cook or not. Since he had no intention to cook, his real intention was to dry the peg, and the cooking happened as a side consequence. So with respect to bishul akum, we're not going to worry about the fact that it was an inevitable side consequence. Whereas with respect to Hilchos Shabbos, this reverts back to the classic din of dover she'einu miskavin psik reisha, and therefore it would be enough to make one chayiv with respect to Hilchos Shabbos. So says the Ramban. Now, there is a lot to think about in this Ramban, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to look at the sugya. The labeling of the Ramban, that he says that this is a dover she'einu miskavin is an interesting thing. I mean, when I drag the bench along the ground and it creates a furrow, this is a genuine dover she'einu miskavin. By the way, I should mention, we're talking about a furrow that's useful for me. It's a positive, it's nichale, let's say. It's a dover she'einu miskavin where I want it. It's useful for me to have the furrow. We're not talking about your lawn being ruined by having the bench dragged across it. We're talking about one's vegetable patch and it gets ploughed through so doing. So it's a positive outcome. Whether I want it or not, it's not a kilkul but a tikkun. That's the classic dover she'einu miskavin where it does a positive outcome, but I have no interest or intention in the outcome as it happens. Over here, the very process is that, as we explained in our Gemara, is that it first all has to have become softened, and then it has to have become hardened. I mean, that is, the softening is integral to the process of hardening it. So we come to an interesting dover she'einu miskavin. If you ask the person baking this peg, do you want it to soften? The real answer is he does, because the softening is the water leaving the pores of the wood and boiling away, as we saw in Rashi, or the Rashi and the Rif, however one learns it. And through that, the wood is comet, the wood shrivels and becomes harder, and that's where I get my tough peg. So this is an interesting example of dover she'einu miskavin here in the melacha. There's another thing also to think about over here, which is the boiling away of the water a melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa? This is the second concept that we mentioned. Melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa is where I don't want the positive result, I want to remove a problem. So in the context of the wood, do I really want the water boiled? Am I interested in cooking the wood or cooking the water, however you learn it, whether it's the boiling off of the water, the boiling of the wood, softening the wood? The answer is no, I don't really have an interest in softening the wood. I have an interest in removing the water so that the wood will now be hard. So surely this is analogous to dover she'einu miskavin, to melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa, in that it's in other words, the Ramban seems to put everything on its head. To call it a dover she'einu miskavin, an unintended side consequence, not so simple. I want this side consequence. Why do I want it? Because that's what's necessary to get to the hardening of the wood. That's the process that you follow. However, what it would be a different svara. It would be melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa, which is where I don't want the melacha for its positive intention, but I want the melacha to remove something problematic. Again, let me just emphasize over here, we have three svaras in Hilchos Shabbos which are easily confusable. We have kilkul, we have melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa, and we have dover she'einu miskavin. These are three different svaras. Kilkul and melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa are unique to Shabbos. Dover she'einu miskavin is a svara in the whole Torah. Kilkul is when it's a negative act, a destructive act. This is unique to Shabbos, incidentally because of Melachos Machshavos. And Melach has to be an act of creativity. Why am I doing my act, which is destructive? Always for a purpose. People don't act for no reasons. But the act is fundamentally, in an objective sense, leaving the world poorer rather than richer. It's removing something. So, for example, if I have a chair and I dismantle the chair, so this is an act of dismantling of sosa. There's a reason I'm doing it. Maybe I don't want the chair, and if I want to discard it, and I want to, it's easier to pack the pieces of wood of the chair into my wheelie bin if it's broken into pieces. Nonetheless, this is an act of kilkul because I've taken a world which has a chair, and I've reduced it to a world which doesn't have a chair. If I erase writing on a piece of paper, moichik. So if I'm doing it in order to clean the paper so I can write something else, that's a creative act. If I'm doing it because I want to remove the writing, that's an act of kilkul because there's less information in the world. I may not want this information, which is why I'm erasing it. I don't want people to be able to breach my privacy and read what I've written. I don't want them to be able to cash the check. However, the fact is what I've done is an act of kilkul because I've removed the writing from the world rather than creating it. This is one svara, kilkul. A second svara is melacha shein tzricha l'gufa. I do the act and I want the act, and the act is not a mekalkel, it's not a negative act in any absolute sense. Having the bee trapped maybe is a positive act. Nonetheless, my motive for doing the melacha isn't the creative positive act of the melacha, but the negative act of removing something, and that's melacha shein tzricha l'gufa. And the third concept is davar she'einu miskavin, a side consequence of something I'm doing. I'm dragging a chair and it happens to plough a field. I'm closing a door and it happens to catch an animal inside. Catching an animal inside, it's not a kilkul, it's a positive. It's a deer. A tzvi is the example of the Gemara. A deer that's a trap in the house. It's positive that the deer is trapped in the house. Nonetheless, it's not my intention. It's a davar she'einu miskavin, and that's a third reason for an exemption that would depend on whether it's a psik ratio or not, whether it's an inevitable side consequence or not. Now let's analyze the words of the Ramban. The Ramban argues that the softening of the word is a davar she'einu miskavin. It seems that this is exactly the opposite. It's not a davar she'einu miskavin because I do intend it to happen. It's not like dragging the chair where the side effect of ploughing the field is irrelevant to the action I want to achieve, that I'm setting out to achieve. It's not like trapping the deer, closing a door of a house, where the side effect that the deer is trapped in the house is irrelevant to the core action that I'm doing. This is integral to the industrial process, the production process of hard pegs. So calling it a davar she'einu miskavin is very, very difficult. What could I call it? Melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa. Because my intention in softening it is to remove the water. So this is a melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa. It's a melacha I'm doing to remove a byproduct that I'm not interested in, perhaps arguably analogous to removing the rubbish from the house, where I don't want the rubbish in the house, I want it out of the way, or trapping the bee, where I don't want the bee to sting me. I don't want the bee rather than wanting the bee. So the Ramban seems to turn the concept on its head in a very difficult way. So I'll pause there simply to set the agenda for the learning on Sunday, and Mitzvah Hashem will continue this on Sunday. There is a run which I printed on the source sheet, which also addresses this question, and I think on some level will tidy up our thinking about the link between the drying and the softening, and it's a very, very important Maramokum. There is a Rashi on the Sugya which is almost incomprehensible. And there's the Rashi in Avodah Zarah. Have a look in the Rashi in Avodah Zarah that I printed. Very difficult Rashi. And then have a look at the Tosfos Rid. And I hope that the Tosfos Rid will help us answer Rashi also. And we will therefore emerge with 4 answers to the question of how to resolve the contradiction between the Sugya in Avodah Zarah and our Sugya in Shabbos. The answer of the Ramban and the Run, which we haven't yet seen. The answer of the Ritva. The answer of the Tosfos Rid. And the answer of Rashi. And I hope that that's what we'll be able to tidy up on Sunday. And out of that will come not just the answer to a contradiction between the Sugya and Shabbos and the Sugya and Avodah Zarah, but hopefully also some greater clarity about what the melacha of Bishul is. So I'll stop there because we've run out of time, and I'll wish you all a good evening.